Council. This led to Wes being elected as the president of the National Union of Students in 2009. After completing his term as president of the NUS, Wes served as chief executive of the Helena Kennedy Foundation, an educational charity that promotes access to higher education to students from further education colleges. Then he went on to serve as head of education at Stonewall, an LGBT+ rights charity, where he led the Education for All campaign to tackle homophobia in schools. Progressing to local politics, in a July 2010 by-election, he was elected as a Labour councillor for the Chadwell ward on the London Borough of Redbridge Council. Then, in the 2015 general election, Wes was elected as a Labour Member of Parliament for Ilford North, the constituency where JLGB HQ is located, and then he was re-elected in the 2019 election. Since becoming an MP, Wes became the Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Anti-Semitism, co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on British Jews. He's also the co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on British Muslims and held a series of London-wide consultations to create the working definition of Islamophobia. After an impressive political career, in October 2020, Sir Keir Starmer, as leader of the Labour Party, appointed Wes as the Shadow Minister for Schools, which I'm sure has been keeping him very busy during lockdown, especially since schools have been closed since January. So, to tell us more and to answer all of your questions, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's honoured guest, Wes Streeting MP. Hi Wes, how are you?
Yeah, hi Abby, thanks very much for having me on, and it's particularly good to talk to you as you're one of my constituents. But as you say, it's been pretty busy for me as Shadow Minister for Schools, because schools and learning have been one of the, I'd argue, sort of biggest casualties of the coronavirus pandemic. If you think about the last year we've been through, it's been the impact on lives, livelihoods, and learning that people have really felt. And particularly for sort of people of your generation who would be sitting exams this year, I know it's been a really, really sort of disruptive, stressful, unusual time. And my job throughout that process has been to hold the government to account, to try and get them to do a better job, and to make sure that when this period passes, that your long-term life chances and opportunities aren't set back. And I'm actually confident that despite everything, your generation will have come through this with a hell of a lot of resilience, and as kind of stressful as it will have been at different points, you'll be able to sort of come through this together. And although I know everyone would be feeling the individual stress and pressure of everything at the moment, ultimately everyone's in the same boat. So I'm doing my best in Parliament to hold ministers' feet to the fire, and sort of people like Gavin Williamson, who are responsible for education and schools in the country. But it's going to be challenging, I think, for the coming weeks and months as we try and get some degree of normality back.
Yeah. So we're so pleased to have you on our programme tonight. We've been boosting positivity and keeping children and their families active, healthy and entertained for 49 weeks now, since the first lockdown began last March. And now, more than over 100 episodes later, we've been viewed online by nearly 3 million people, thanks to the help of a special guest like you, helping us each evening. So why did you feel it was important to join us this evening?
I guess a number of reasons. One is, you mentioned JLGB is based in my constituency, and I'm always keen to support the work that you do. Secondly, I'm glad you mentioned actually the sort of the positive work that's been going on for 49 weeks, because I mentioned some of the challenges, but it hasn't all been doom and gloom. And I think it's important to bear in mind that sort of people have been doing some really great and interesting things to keep connected, to keep active, to find new ways of socializing, and sort of trying to break up the monotony of sort of being stuck at home and sort of being let out for a walk once a day. And I want to support that. Also because I do think an important part of my job, and this applies to sort of my role as a constituency MP as much as it does as Shadow Schools Minister, is to go out and talk to youth groups, community groups. I would normally do loads of school visits and visit schools in my constituency and take questions. And although lots of young people under the age of 18 won't be able to vote yet, I still think your voice in politics is really important. politicians being accountable to you is really important. Making sure, particularly actually given the challenges that we've got in the country, that we're able to hear directly from you about the issues that are important to you, challenges about what you think needs to be done better, and making sure that politicians are speaking up effectively on your behalf. So that's an important representative part of my work as a constituency MP, let alone shadow schools minister. And let's be honest, what else would I be doing on a Thursday night? I've even kind of binged my way through loads of box sets, and I'm rapidly running out of ideas of things to watch. I think that's the stage of lockdown we're in. So, frankly, it was you or reruns of Schitt's Creek. So, and I've watched it so many times now. Very happy to be here talking to people.
We're very happy to have you. So, as you would have seen, we're all about acts of kindness here, and we always ask our guests what they've been doing to help others. So, is there a personal, particular act of kindness that you've been doing to help others during this pandemic?
Well, that's you've touched on a really important part of an MP's work that doesn't get enough coverage or attention. Sort of people think about MPs and they think about the House of Commons, Prime Minister's Question Time, or popping up on the news, having an argument about the issues of the day. One of the most important parts of an MP's job is helping individuals with the challenges they're up against. And I've got a really good small team of dedicated caseworkers, and we've helped thousands of people during the course of the pandemic. And actually the level of casework we received is higher than at any point since I was elected back in 2015. So that can be all sorts of things, by the way, helping people if they haven't had their invitation to get a vaccine, who would be of the age where they'd be invited. We've got lots of delays in terms of healthcare appointments, but there are all the sorts of issues that are normally issues like housing, immigration, and people's livelihoods and incomes, particularly at the moment. Everything's just been made more complicated by the pandemic. So there's more work for us to do, and more complexity added to that work because of the challenging times we're in. Beyond that, sort of on a personal level, I've been trying to look out for my friends, family and neighbours. There are people who, have had to self-isolate during the pandemic. So, sort of picking up shopping, and there are kind of really simple things that I've been doing to try and help sort of people I'm close to during the pandemic. And actually, I think, again, thinking about some of the positives that have come out of this last year, I do think in a strange way, although we're more apart than we've ever been, we've also been drawn closer together as well in terms of the support for each other, the sense of community and that national spirit. So, none of us would have wished for any of this, but it hasn't all been doom and gloom. And I think actually there's been a lot of positive, good acts of kindness and human nature that we should celebrate and take some heart in as well.
Definitely. So let's go back to the very beginning, if I may, your childhood. You often talk about a challenging childhood, being on free school meals and often bullied. So if you don't mind, can you tell us more? And growing up, did you have youth opportunities in a safe space like JLGB that you were involved in?
Yeah, so my background and experience is pretty unusual for most politicians. I come from a very working class family. I grew up on a council estate in Stepney in East London, received free school meals, as you mentioned. My mum was a single parent. Both my mum and my dad were very young when I was born. So my mum was 18 about to turn 19. My dad was 17 about to turn 18. So kind of what's probably technically known as an accident. I was not planned or expected, and their relationship didn't last. And although I've been very, very lucky to have both my parents in my life throughout my life, and I'm very close to my parents and they support me a lot. I spent the first 10 11 years living with my mum, and then I went to live with my dad, and particularly during the earlier part of my childhood where I lived with my mum, things were pretty difficult actually for her as a single mum, a young single mum, sort of bringing up a son, juggling to make ends meet. So, I know what it's like when, you rely on benefits to put food in the fridge. I understand what it's like when the electricity meter runs out and the lights go off and the emergency supplies run out as well. And I've got those sorts of not nice experiences of childhood, bluntly. But, I had a very supportive, loving family, great grandparents as well. and their support, the support that I had from my teachers, enabled me to do well at school, and ultimately become the first person in my family to go to university, and not just any old university, but to go to Cambridge University. I'm very proud of going there. And there aren't many kids on free school meals who kind of do that and end up where I am. And I think that's important for politics more generally, by the way, because I think, having a representative democracy, having diverse politicians who come from a range of different backgrounds is really important when you're making decisions about, every aspect of life in the country, and having different perspectives helps lead to better decisions, I think. You asked about, did I have youth groups and stuff growing up? No, not really. And I really regret that. And I have to say, as someone who is not from the Jewish community, but has worked with the Jewish community for many years, going back to when I was involved in student politics. I used to do loads of work with UJS, the Union of Jewish Students. It's one of the things I really envy about the Jewish community, actually, is that strong, it is just such a strong community. The youth groups, organisations around the shul, the collective solidarity of the Jewish community, and you see it run right the way through, actually, from the youth movements right through to Jewish care and the support that's provided in old age. The role that CST plays in providing collective security for the Jewish community, which I wish wasn't necessary, but sadly is, given rising anti-Semitism. There's something quite special about the Jewish community, and the way in which it really does hang together as a community, and people support each other, look out for each other. I think it's something that actually society as a whole could really learn from. And so, yeah, I wasn't involved in sort of anything like JLGB when I was growing up, and I really wish I had been. And whenever I sort of visit or hear about the programs that you're running and part of, I just think is amazing, actually, and you're very lucky to have it.
Definitely very lucky. So I read that you've always wanted to become an MP, even as early as primary school. So what was your motivation at such a young age?
Yeah, it's one of those, I really hate it. Not now, by the way. But I hate it when sort of you get asked a question in kind of news interviews, like, sort of, when did you want to become an MP or whatever? Because my answer, which is an honest answer, is also like the answer no one wants to hear, is like, this sort of like cringeworthy, like, politician wanted to become a politician from an early age. But no, I'm told by my family that it's something I used to talk about. I do remember when I was in primary school once, my head teacher asked us to sort of draw a picture of what we wanted to be when we grew up, and I drew a picture of the black door of number 10 and a sort of little car, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to be the Prime Minister. God knows where I got this kind of sense of ambition and entitlement from, but it's not done me too well. And to be honest, I make no apologies for it, because before I became an MP, and actually I still do it now with the sort of talks I give in schools and to actually youth groups like yours, is I really think that having ambition and high aspirations is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. And actually, sometimes, particularly for kids from working class or underrepresented backgrounds, I think there's sometimes a sense of, oh, well, I'll never be able to do that because I'm not from a rich enough background, or I'm not from a well-connected enough background, or, maybe I'm a woman, or I'm from an ethnic minority. And, we know that we live in a society where discrimination is a reality, and where other people will try and put ceilings on your ambition and try and put hurdles in your way. And I think we just got to smash through those glass ceilings and clear those hurdles. And people should have like all the drive and ambition to go wherever their talents, their limitations, and their ambitions kind of will take them, really. When I was in secondary school, I remember we had a mock election in 1997. I stood as the Labour candidate, came as a respectable second to the monster raving Looney Party candidate, which I was very proud of at the time. And it was an exciting time. Tony Blair was sweeping Labour to power. I just got swept up in it. And I decided then, and I still feel very passionately, that politics is an amazing way to make a difference. For all the cynicism and perfectly legitimate criticism of politics and politicians, it is still a noble ambition, a noble calling, and most people are in it for the right reasons. In fact, just before I was speaking to you guys this evening, I was speaking to a group of donors to the National AIDS Trust, which is one of the kind of big HIV/AIDS organisations in the country, because I was part of something called the Independent HIV Commission, and we did a really big piece of cross-party work looking at how we can end HIV transmissions in Britain by 2030. And I was telling them that one of the reasons why we're going to be a success and we're going to achieve it is because of cross-party working and the way we've come together to do it. In fact, you've got Matt Hancock from the Conservative Party and Keir Starmer from the Labour Party basically committing to this ambition and committing to working together to do it. And someone asked me, why has this happened? And I just, I said, I gave some kind of practical reasons about the policy, but I said, don't forget that fundamentally politicians are in politics because we want to make a difference. And if someone's presented a plan showing you how to end HIV transmissions in the country by 2030, given you a plan to do it, and you know it's going to be life-changing, why wouldn't you do it? So yeah, I'm passionate about politics. I believe it does more good than harm. I want to tear my hair out about politics every day. There are always things in the news or things going on that drive me up the wall, especially being an opposition politician. But one thing I will say for all MPs, or at least the vast majority, including the Conservative ones, is that while we may not always agree about the means, I think actually we share a lot of the same goals. We want to make our country a better place. We want to make our world a better place. We have different ideas sometimes about how to do that, a different set of values guiding us sometimes. And that's the contested space of politics. But I think politics is still a very noble cause.
Definitely. So throughout university, you were a member of Cambridge University Students' Union Council, and then you were elected as president of the National Union of Students before becoming a local councillor. So why do you think it's so important that young people become politically engaged today? And would you recommend a career in politics?
The second question is really easy. Yes, I absolutely would. And there are loads of ways to have a career in politics. I mean, you can be an elected politician. It's a great way to make a difference. But, I wouldn't be an effective MP without a brilliant team of staff behind me. That I don't have loads of staff, but, I've got a researcher, I've got caseworkers who help with people's individual problems, which I mentioned. Yeah. There are jobs in the civil service. There are jobs in government. There are jobs working for political parties on campaigning. There's such a wide range of jobs available in politics. And I think if you've got passion about making a difference, there's probably a job for you available in politics in one way, shape or form. So even if you're not party political, there are still ways of serving government locally and nationally. And if you are party political, frankly, political parties will bite your hand off because we always want more people involved. We always want more volunteers, and we increasingly want younger people standing for elections to things like the local council, where, believe it or not, there are loads of decisions being made that affect young people. We want more young people's voices. As for your sort of other question about why is it important? I mean, again, that's an easy question to answer, in that there are so many decisions taken that affect young people. The hard answer to your question is, how do we get more young people being active in politics? Because I've tried this for years and years. When I was president of NUS, we had a big effort to get more students voting at the 2010 general election. But the truth is that when you look at voter turnout, for 18 to 35-year-olds, it's way younger than older categories of voters, particularly pensioners. And that has a real impact on political decisions. I have been involved in conversations, both as a lobbyist and campaigner and as a politician, where people talk about different sections of voters. And I think what happens is, because young people are less likely to turn out, young people bear the brunt of decisions which I think are terrible. University tuition fees were trebled to £3,000 and then trebled to £9,000. I mean, we've lost the education maintenance allowance. Student grants were scrapped. And I just think, if this is the way that politicians are treating younger people, the answer is to turn out and vote. Obviously, I want you to vote for me and I want you to vote for my party. But the truth is, whoever you vote for, just turning out and voting will get voter turnout up amongst young people. And it means politicians will start chasing the youth vote, because it could be the difference between winning and losing a general election. So my kind of massive kind of message, appeal to you all is to use your vote when you get one, turn out and vote and make your voices heard. But that's not the only way to be involved in politics. And I'd urge you to be good, active citizens. I'd argue that by being involved in JLGB, you're basically already doing that. But so making your voice heard, lobbying MPs, writing to your MPs and councillors, being involved in different campaigns on issues you care about, that is, a really great thing to do. And we do listen, believe it or not, people writing to us, lobbying us, it does have an impact. So if nothing else, vote. I hope that's the least I can ask of you and expect, but also, be active citizens as well. And, by the time you leave JLGB, don't forget the lessons you've learned and the experience you've gained by being involved in JLGB, and carry it forward with you in life to be really good, active citizens. Because ultimately, it's all of our responsibility to shape our society for the better.
Yeah. And I think it was really interesting that you mentioned that, a career in politics isn't just about being part of a party, because I think a lot of people associate politics and being a politician with being part of a party. So I think it's really important that people know that. So how could I possibly be the host this evening and not talk about Ilford, Redbridge and Essex, where I attend King Solomon High School, and of course where you are the MP for Ilford North. So what first drew you to the area, and why are you so proud to be our Member of Parliament and live in one of the most diverse and growing local populations in the country?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question, because it gives us a chance to bang the drum for Ilford and Redbridge. I've lived in Redbridge for, must be sort of about good 20 years now. And basically, I was drawn to the area by my dad, who I moved out. Well, I went off to university in my first year, and we were living in Hornchurch, sort of Upminster Bridge. And then when I moved back after the end of one term, we'd moved to Redbridge, and basically my dad has since moved back further out into Essex. He lives in Hornchurch again. But I've put down roots and stayed here, and I live in Barkingside, which is slap bang in the middle of my constituency. For those of you who aren't from Ilford North, my constituency is basically most of the Red Hainault Loop on the Central Line. I love the area. I mean, I think it's great for quality of life. In normal times, there are times when you're on a night out or you're coming home late from work, and getting on the tube and schlepping out to Zone 4 isn't the kind of the end to the evening you really want. But I tell you what, during lockdown, I think the quality of life benefits of living in the suburbs have just been really welcome. I mean, I've got Fairlock Waters Country Park 2 minutes from where I live, Hainault Forest Country Park a short drive away, Claybury Park and Forest. There are loads of like parks and open spaces. I think is a real kind of gift of Redbridge, and something I kind of want to preserve and protect. I love the diversity of our community. Growing up in East London, it's always been diverse. But I love the fact you've got people from different backgrounds, faiths, cultures. I think that's a real strength for the area as well. I'm proud of the constituency I represent, because I think all of us have got a very similar story actually about how we ended up living here. And, there's a well-trodden path from the East End out to Redbridge, and that's certainly part of the Jewish story of Redbridge and the Jewish community that kind of gradually migrated from East London out. In fact, at one point we had, I think, the largest Jewish community outside of Israel in Ilford. That's not the case anymore. But one thing I won't have, even as someone from outside the community, and I try not to poke my nose into internal Jewish community politics very much. It's really not my place. But the one thing I won't have are those communities outside Redbridge who kind of talk our community down and will be like, oh, it's not what it used to be. It's getting smaller, isn't it? And actually, I think we've got a really vibrant, strong Jewish community here in Redbridge. Actually, we've got, just in my constituency, we've also got your school, King Solomon, which actually I think is the best of both worlds, right? Because it's a Jewish school with a Jewish ethos, which lots of parents and students really appreciate. But it's also got a diverse intake. So you've got that kind of great combination of a school that has your faith ethos, but also meeting kids from different backgrounds and cultures, which I think is a strength. We've got two great local Jewish primary schools, Ilford Jewish and and Clwyd Tikva. We've got a whole number of shawls. We've got Sinclair House. So although the community isn't as large as it was maybe 10, 20 years ago, I think it's still a strong, resilient community, and one that will be here for many years to come. And so anyone who goes around sort of, going, oh, it's basically the I grew up in Ilford, but they've moved elsewhere lot that I've, we had a really great, I was at Limud the other year, and we had a great panel of Marie van der Zeel, who grew up in Redbridge, is obviously now president of the Board of Deputies. Adrian Cohen, who is the lay chair of Labour Friends of Israel, who grew up in my constituency. Sort of a whole bunch of us now in different sort of positions, and it was interesting sort of listening to them about their experience growing up. But part of the problem is it's I grew up in Ilford, and but then they've moved elsewhere, and they're like, oh, it's not what it used to be over there. And it's like, shut your cake hole. Actually, the community around here is very strong, very resilient, and contributes a lot. So I'm sure we've got loads of future Jewish community leaders growing up in my constituency today, and I hope there are future leaders for our country more generally in all sorts of aspects of life.
Definitely. So now we're going to jump to the audience. First up, we have Emily Panto from Boreham Wood.
Hi, Wes.
Hiya.
This pandemic's been truly awful, especially for the elderly and those of high risk, but it's also impacted children and young people too. And not being in school for months and the uncertainty about exams has had a serious toll on my and others' mental health. Do you think enough focus is being given to young people and their mental health at this time?
Well, thanks, Emily. That's a great question. No is the blunt answer. There's lots to unpack there, I think. One is that, I'm not pretending any of this would have been easy, and that there are big challenges for government. But I think what was really needed throughout the last year is for us as sort of political leaders to give your teachers, head teachers, the certainty and confidence to be able to let you know what's going on, and to give you that sense of, don't worry, you don't need to worry, because we've got this in hand. It's all going to be all right. And unfortunately, we've had sort of debacle after debacle. We had the exams mess last summer, the mess around the return to school in September, the absolute, chaos at the beginning of January. So all of that has added to the sort of stresses and anxieties of children and young people, I think. And I'm sorry, because I don't think you should have gone through that. And although I will obviously lay the blame at the government's door, and we regularly argue with them and sort of challenge them on various aspects of this, and have tried to anticipate problems before they become problems. So on exams, for example, before Christmas, I was saying, you've got to have a plan for exams to go ahead, but you also need a plan B in case they can't. Had the government done that work, schools would have had a lot more certainty a lot sooner, and then you would have had that certainty. And I've been speaking to a lot of teachers who are saying, it's really frustrating, because we're supposed to give our students, reassurance and confidence, and we've not been able to do that. But so while I've laid the blame at the government's door, I do feel a sense of responsibility as a politician, a sort of collective sense of responsibility, that we have not done as well by your generation as we should have done. And certainly, I think young people's sort of mental health and services to support young people's mental health in normal times aren't good enough. And I think they're particularly falling short now. The one thing I would say to you and anyone else who's watching this who does feel anxious and is worried and really concerned about the impact this is going to have on your future, it's very easy for me to say this, but trust me when I say that, I don't think you need to be too worried, actually, and too anxious. You're all in the same boat. You're all going through this. And I genuinely think that most people in this country are mindful of the challenge your generation is going through and are having to face up to, and actually quite, admiring of the way that your generation is coping with this, actually. And I'm not just sort of speaking for your parents and families who've been sort of trying to support you through this. I think there are lots of people who really do appreciate the challenges you've been up against and how you've faced up to them. And actually, I don't think this is going to impact on your long-term life chances and opportunities. And I'm absolutely determined that won't be the case. But if you think about the sorts of steps you might want to take beyond school, whether that's kind of further study at college or university, they all know the drill. They've all had to, support their students through this now, and they are going to really understand what you've been through and take that into account when making all sorts of decisions about things like admissions, for example. So try and take it in your stride, do your best, and just remember that you are in the same boat as everyone else. So don't pile too much pressure on yourselves. And I know this is easier said than done, but I do think that actually in time, when you look back on this period, I think you will appreciate you've probably developed a hell of a lot of resilience and personal strength, even if at the time it hasn't always felt like that.
So our next question is from Adam from Liverpool.
Hi, Wes. So schools were returning on Monday, and obviously, like you've said, schools are important. But do you think teachers have had enough support? For example, should they have been in a priority group for vaccines? And if in power, how would you have gone about it differently as the Minister for Schools?
Yeah, that's a great question, Adam. Thanks for that. I don't think teachers have, first and foremost, I don't think teachers have been given enough credit, actually. We've clapped for the NHS and carers. It'd be now nice if we paid them properly, but at least they got that public recognition. I think a lot of teachers have bust a gut over the last year, and support staff, to try and keep students learning, whether in school or at home, to try and support the well-being of their students, whilst also, bluntly having their own stresses and anxieties as staff and professionals. And I just don't think they've been given nearly enough credit for that, or thanks and support. And actually, one of the things that I've found quite nice when I've been talking to groups of school students and youth groups is the number of students that have been asking questions on behalf of their teachers and basically supporting their teachers and giving them a lot of thanks and support. I strongly think teachers should have been vaccinated ahead of Monday's school return. I understand the way that the Joint Committee on Vaccinations makes its decisions, and it's basically said we're going to go in order of age because age is a good predictor of clinical vulnerability, and we want to prevent deaths and hospitalizations. I understand that, but I think we need to think about vulnerability not just in terms of clinical vulnerability and the risk of falling ill, but vulnerability in terms of exposure to the virus. And of course, key workers like teachers are exposed to people, and large numbers of people, on a daily basis. The second thing is, we found when schools returned in September that one of the key challenges for head teachers keeping schools running and keeping the show on the road was staff absences through sickness. And so vaccinating teachers makes it much less likely they're going to be off, and much less likely that that's going to impact on your learning. And I think a decision should have been taken by government that said, we understand JCVI's kind of prioritisation, the vaccinisation body, and we're going to mostly go with that, but we're going to vaccinate teachers as well, because we've decided that education is a priority and we've got to keep students learning. And there's also some encouraging evidence to suggest that vaccination not only reduces the risk of catching the virus for individuals who have the vaccine, it also reduces transmission as well. So I'm really disappointed that schools are returning on Monday without teachers being vaccinated. We're continuing to bang the drum for it. And I hope that when schools return, we're not going to see a big uptick in wider infections, because that, we are making progress. I don't want to see that set back. I am glad, by the way, that you're going back to school. I think that is really important. And we've said all the way through that school should be the last to close and the first to reopen. So that priority is right. But I really wish that teachers had been vaccinated before Monday.
Yeah. Honestly, I can't agree with you enough about the recognition for teachers. And my mum is the year 6 teacher at Ilford Primary School, and just the amount of work and the support that she gives us for our family, but then all of the support that she goes and gives her class and with school, and just how hard she's been working throughout this whole pandemic. I think it's something that wider society needs to be aware of, because without the work that the teachers have been doing, I think it's very easy for people to not see directly how much work and how much impact that they've had, because teachers aren't just there to teach, they give support, they're just so important, and I can't agree with you more there. So the next question is from Emily, who is currently at Nottingham University.
Hi there, I'm also from Ilford, by the way. As mentioned, you were the president of the National Union of Students in 2009, and since then university fees have more than tripled, and many are missing out this year on key parts of their education as a result of this pandemic. So do you support student demands for refunds and compensation on tuition fees and accommodation?
Yeah, I think it's a total mess. And one of the things that's made me quite angry about the situation facing university students is, when I was knocking around in student politics and having arguments with the last Labour government, because I was president of NUS from 2008 to 10, so I left just as the new Tory government was coming in, or coalition government. This whole system of tuition fees has been sold on sort of two principles, really. One is that students earn more as graduates and therefore should contribute to the cost of their higher education, which I have some sympathy with. And then the other argument is that if you're paying for it, you'll become more demanding consumers, and therefore the quality of education will rise as there'll be competition for students, and consumer demand will drive better outcomes. And I've always been opposed to that kind of market vision of universities. And I think it's been shown to be completely bogus, especially during this pandemic, because you've got all of the obligations of being consumers, but none of the consumer rights. And in a normal consumer market, if you're not receiving the product you pay for, you would be getting refunds, you'd be getting discounts, but you don't really have those consumer rights. You've got students forking out for accommodation that they're not using. And I know that some universities have stepped in and given things like accommodation rebates, but we know loads of students are in the private rented sector. So there's been an inequality there about those who are in university halls and those that are in private rented accommodation. So I think that, I hope that one of the lessons from the pandemic is that the consumer sort of driven vision of higher education is a load of rubbish and hasn't worked, and it needs serious reform. So that's what I would like to see. The government have put support in place for students, but as Emma Hardy, the Shadow Universities Minister, was raising just this Monday in Parliament, when you compare the support that the government has provided for students in England with the support provided by the Welsh government and the Scottish government, it's pale in comparison. So I think the government needs to step up and provide a lot more support back to students. And I'm really sorry actually for you, because it's, I know universities are doing online lectures and stuff like that, but let's be honest, if you've chosen to go away from home to study at university, you're expecting a broader student experience and you're just not getting it. And you're being saddled with the cost. And I just think that's unjust.
Thank you.
The next question is from Louis from Cardiff.
Hi, if not for organisations like JLGB and their kosher-friendly provisions of everyday youth activities, many young people from different faith and cultural backgrounds would be excluded from British society. Do you think local authorities and the government have an understanding of the barriers to participation and the need for targeted services?
I don't think it's well understood enough. I think we're moving in the right direction, Louis. But it's something we have to be vigilant about. And it's one of the reasons I sort of chaired both the all-party group on British Jews and on British Muslims as well, because I think there are challenges which go beyond those of direct discrimination or hate crime or harassment, and that's where kind of the anti-Semitism APPG comes in. It's more about understanding the facets of Jewish life that means that good public services ought to be making provisions and adjustments. So we really shouldn't still be having issues where people are turning up and not having kosher meal options, for example. And even during lockdown, with things like food parcels and stuff, families with religious dietary requirements were still being given sort of products with pork in, for example. We've been challenging the North East London coroner on things like Jewish burials and the importance of, speed for religious reasons, and, coming up against a pretty intransigent coroner. So those sorts of things, I think, ought to be taken into account and consideration. Things are getting better. They're certainly better than they were maybe sort of 10 or 20 years ago, but clearly there's a lot more to be done. And that's where, strong representation in Parliament comes in, but also strong community-based organisations come in. And, that's one of the real strengths, I think, again, of the Jewish community, is you've got representative bodies like the Board of Deputies, the Jewish Leadership Council, and others. And of course, you've got vibrant youth movements as well. And, I'd strongly encourage you to make sure your voices are heard, directly through JLGB, also within your community as well. And I think it's great that, I often see popping up on my Twitter feed more and more young people being elected to the Board of Deputies, not just through, the youth representation, but also through their shuls as well. And I think that's great. And, as with anything, where decisions are being made, it should look like the people who are affected by those decisions. So having more diverse representation at every level, including representation of and for younger voices, is really important.
So our next question is from Alex Vanderzeel from Mill Hill.
Hi. So following on from the last question, there seems to be debate and confusion recently, even though it's law that as well as faith, Jews are also classed as an ethnic minority. But to quote David Badil's new book, For Many Jews Don't Count, that the needs of our minority community, or even anti-Semitism, by some are considered a lesser form of racism. How has this become an issue that British Jews are facing in 2021, and what do you think can be done?
I think, it's a very good and topical question, unfortunately. I don't know if you saw it. I was horrified the other day that Politics Live had a discussion, a very short one, but had a very short discussion on should Jews count as an ethnic minority, and that was kind of the big banner strap at the bottom. And I just thought, how is this up for debate? The simple fact is that Judaism is a religion, and Jews are a race of people who have throughout their history been victims of racism and are still today victims of racism. And this is such a basic, fundamental fact. I don't understand how a mainstream broadcaster, let alone the public service broadcaster, offered this up for debate and discussion and allowed a panel of people, the vast majority of whom were not Jewish, to pontificate on this. I think it's for Jewish people to define themselves and their experiences and the racism that they are victims of as well. And I mean, this has been, as you'll know, a real problem in my party, where people have not listened to the experiences of Jewish people and Jewish voices, and haven't taken the complaints of Jewish members of the Labour Party seriously when they've complained about anti-Semitism. And I do think this is a problem in wider society as well, of anti-Semitism still not being understood. It's why the work of organisations like the Holocaust Educational Trust remains absolutely central and vital. But as I said in this year's Holocaust Memorial Day in Parliament, I think we've got a bit of a problem with anti-Semitism and people's sort of personal convictions that they are anti-racists, when their kind of conception of anti-Semitism is simply of, jackbooted Nazis and swastikas and gas chambers. Anti-Semitism in modern Britain doesn't look like that. Of course, you've got problems with anti-Semitism on the far right and fascism, and we saw plenty of people marching through the streets of Charlottesville in the United States the other year bearing the swastika and making anti-Semitic chants. But, particularly with anti-Semitism on the left, but also, other everyday manifestations of anti-Semitism, it's not just about the extremes of Nazism, it's about, the everyday casual language, abuse, perceptions of Jews. And particularly this idea of Jews as wealthy, powerful, kind of well-connected, therefore can't be victims of racism. I mean, putting to one side the fact that, like every other community in this country, the Jewish community is diverse, and there are plenty of people in the Jewish community who have been and are having a really hard time financially. You know, the fact that we've got a well-organized Jewish community with strong community organizations and people who've been successful in the Jewish community who give back to the Jewish community and to wider society does not mean that Jews can't be victims of racism. And I think we've got a hell of a lot more to do to educate people about what anti-Semitism is, how it manifests itself, and our collective responsibility to tackle it. I mean, one of the things that, you know, I've thrown myself into this, both within my party and more broadly, because, you know, particularly with the Labour Party, I felt that it wasn't just a responsibility of my friends who were victims of racism as Jewish women to fight that racism. I have a responsibility, not just as a friend or even as a member of parliament, but just as a good citizen, to stand against racism directed against other people. But we've, you know, this week showed, I'm afraid, we've got a hell of a long way to go. And even in sort of polite society and polite company and on the nation's public service broadcaster, people can't get their heads around the basic facts of anti-Semitism, what it is and how it manifests itself. And that is a big challenge for us to address.
Thank you. And I think actually what you said was really important about the microaggressions. And I think that they're actually just as, if not more important, because they're so casual. And I think that a lot of people are only aware of, you know, as you said, really severe issues, but I think the microaggressions are just as important. And I think that this brings us to the unavoidable question that, you know, unfortunately, the Jewish community still have, you know, remembered everything that's happened with the Labour Party. And of course, you were a harsh critic of Jeremy Corbyn, who has now been suspended. And I'm sure that the issue has obviously got better, but do you think that the party has done enough to win back the Jewish voters? And do you think that this might stop the community in areas like Redbridge voting for the re-election of Sadiq Khan as the Labour Mayor of London in May?
So, I mean, this has been a painful period of the Labour Party's history. And, you know, you said, you know, pointed out as a harsh critic of Jeremy Corbyn. I would also say I was a fair critic. And I'm afraid if Jeremy Corbyn and the people around him had listened to what I and others were saying about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and acted, or even acted on their own promises to tackle anti-Semitism, we wouldn't have ended up in the humiliating and morally bankrupt position of being only the second party in British political history to be investigated for racism and unlawful conduct towards a group based on their race and ethnicity and faith. And the first political party to be investigated on that basis was the British National Party, a far-right racist party. So it's not the sort of company that a left-wing progressive party that purports to believe in equality should ever have been in. And I mean, it just sort of think, you know, reliving it in my mind, sort of what I saw and heard over the last sort of 5-6 years it's painful, because, you know, I saw, you know, really amazing colleagues like Ruth Smeeth, Margaret Hodge, Louise Ellman, Luciana Berger, absolutely hounded, not just as Jewish MPs, but Jewish women as well. So I don't think there's any coincidence about that and the way that they were treated as prominent Jewish women in public life. I mean, it led to Luciana, who's a good friend of mine and remains a friend of mine, leaving the Labour Party, along with other good friends of mine. Louise Ellman leaving the Labour Party. And, you know, while Margaret and Ruth stayed, their attitude was stay and fight, not, you know, we're staying because we think this is all okay. And, you know, it led to the sorts of conversations with, you know, people in our community that I would never have imagined. When I was first elected in 2015, there was a lot of support and affection for my predecessor in the Jewish community, Lee Scott, who was obviously Jewish himself, and also a victim of anti-Semitism in public life too. But the sorts of conversations I was having with voters was on the sort of the usual lines you would expect, like, you know, what they thought of Labour or Conservative policies, or whether or not they liked my predecessor, and whether or not I could persuade them to come and vote for me, even if they did like him. And, you know, the sort of arm twisting I was trying to do as a candidate in 2015, you know, the normal run of the mill conversations. By 2017, and certainly by 2019, I was having conversations with lifelong Labour voters along the lines of, I am frightened of voting Labour. I am frightened of what a Labour government would mean for me, my family, my community. And those were the hardest conversations. I mean, we, you know, shed tears over this, you know, over the years, and I had people in tears on the doorstep telling me why they couldn't vote for me as their MP and couldn't vote for my party, and it was heartbreaking. So I think, you know, the cautionary advice I have for my party is that don't assume that because there's been a change at the top that people are just going to come flooding back. Or don't assume that just because the HRC has reported and we've got an action plan that people are now going to say, all right, I can vote Labour again. You know, trust is hard earned and easily lost. And I think one of the things that reassures me about Keir Starmer and his leadership and his team is that he understands, I think, the depth of grief and pain in the Jewish community. And he understands the responsibility resting on his shoulders. We understand the collective responsibility resting on our shoulders to not just say we've changed and to say the right thing, but to do it and prove it. And that's where I want us to get to as a political party, so that even if people are, you know, still are voting for other political parties because, you know, that's where their convictions and their belief and their principles take them, I never want people again to fear voting Labour or fear what a Labour government would bring. It should be the opposite. People should be inspired by what we're offering. They should feel excited about the prospect of change and a Labour government. And we fell to morally abysmal depths under our previous leadership, and we've got to show we've changed, and that's a process, not an event. And we're making the right progress, and I see and hear all the right things coming out from Keir. I think he is a decent, principled, honourable man, but we've got a long way to go. And, you know, Sadiq Khan as London Mayor, I mean, I really admired Sadiq actually for the way he used his platform as London Mayor to challenge anti-Semitism and to speak out against Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and the mistakes they were making too. And, you know, I think he is someone that the community has sort of come to appreciate, that they can work with and support and trust. And I hope people will vote for him in the May elections, and I'll be out campaigning for Sadiq, and I can campaign for Sadiq with a clear conscience. I have to say I felt very personally conflicted at previous elections, but you know, especially when people who I like and know and trust were saying to me, how can you stand for the Labour Party given what you're saying about anti-Semitism and what's happening? But I really felt a moral responsibility to try and rescue a great party, a party with a proud history, a party with a long-standing relationship with the Jewish community, and to help rescue it and make sure that in British politics, both of our mainstream parties are, you know, anti-racist parties. I mean, there are clearly big challenges in the Conservative Party on all sorts of fronts, and, you know, I've been working with Saeed Avasi about some of their challenges with Islamophobia. But in terms, what I can do is try and get our house in order. And I've never criticised those people who left, because I understood the reasons they did, and I know how painful that was for them. And I think those were courageous and honourable decisions. I'm always made a different choice though, and I'm glad I stayed. I'm glad of the progress we've made, but I know that we've got a lot further to go.
Yeah. So just quickly, before we go back to some more audience questions, there are lots of people watching on social media now and are asking this question. So today, over 100 parliamentarians signed an APPG anti-Semitism letter to Bristol University condemning David Miller and his anti-Semitic remarks. And people want to know whether you signed the letter.
No, I didn't, and I can explain why. I had a day out yesterday at both of our local hospitals with what turned out to be a kidney stone. So I was hospitalised yesterday. I got the call through from the APPG yesterday morning and was in the process of, because normally as shadow ministers we're not allowed to sign sort of open letters or round robin letters, and you have to get permission. So I'd had an exchange with the APPG yesterday morning, and my phone died, and I was in quite a lot of pain yesterday. But I do fully support the letter, and I'll be honest. You know, the issue of universities and anti-Semitism has been an issue going right back to when I was involved in student politics, which is how I come to, you know, learn about anti-Semitism in its modern form, rather than just the sort of, you know, Nazis in history that we've been taught in schools. And I still think universities have got a hell of a lot more to do to tackle anti-Semitism on their campuses, and the response of Bristol University has just been woefully inadequate. And I think, you know, the JSOC there, the Jewish Society on campus, has done a really, really brilliant job of campaigning on this. They've had great support, and I'm proud to count myself among their supporters. And I think it's time that the university understood that it's a community of scholarship, and, you know, they've got responsibility to members of that community, actually. And on a very basic level, because I strongly support academic freedom, and I don't like the idea instinctively of academics being disciplined for what they say. But, you know, it's not like this guy has produced some impressive or interesting piece of academic scholarship. He is just a crank. And I don't think it reflects very well on Bristol University and their academic standards that they employ someone like that, bluntly. And I don't see why Jewish students should be expected to tolerate this kind of, you know, rubbish on campus. So yeah, I'm strongly support the JSOC at Bristol. And yeah, I'm sorry my kidney stone and
I was going to
my
say,
hospitalisation yesterday got in the way of me signing it, because I fully support the letter.
I was going to say, given that you spent the whole day in hospital, I think we can let you off the hook for that one. So we are now going to go to Sydney Miller for the next question.
Hiya. Last week, the Prime Minister gave us his roadmap out of lockdown, but do you believe that he's actually going to keep to these dates? The reason I ask is because so many of us would like there to be a JLGB summer camp in August, which we couldn't have last summer. However, currently there is the Department of Education regulation in law stopping all school trips and residentials, which obviously means that youth groups won't be able to run overnight activities until this ban is lifted. So do you think you might be able to ask the question in the House of Commons to Gavin Williamson of when and if this restriction might be lifted, so youth and outdoor education sectors can start properly planning for summer programmes before it's too late?
Yeah, thanks, Sydney. I'm very happy to ask the question and to try and get some degree of confidence and certainty. I think Boris Johnson's left himself a bit of a hostage to fortune with this roadmap. And I'll be honest, I was a bit nervous when he kind of put dates on all of these key milestones, because I know I am just the same as everyone else, right? I'm desperate to be able to see my family again. I'm desperate to be able to go to the pub again. I'm desperate to be able to kind of socialise and to be able to go to work in the way I normally would, and all of it. I cannot wait, like everyone else. But, you know, what Boris Johnson has said, and where he's right, is we've got to be driven by the data, not by dates. And that's why I don't quite understand why he's put these. I think, to be honest, he's put these dates in because he's getting pressure from right-wing Conservative MPs who don't believe in lockdown at all and think we should be kind of just opening up and let the virus run its course. And so I think he's put in the dates as a sort of sop. But I think ultimately we've got to be driven by the data. We've got to do the right thing. We've got to, make sure we keep the virus under control, get the vaccine rollout, and then we can open to life as normal. But I would like to see your summer camp being able to run as normal. I really want us, after the year we've had, to give young people a summer to look forward to, and to be able to have like a great summer of activities and you know, a summer that people look back on and remember it, you know, at the end of a sort of struggle of a year, to be able to think, but you know, it ended really well. That's what I would like us to be able to look back on. But I will certainly ask what plans the government has to review and lift restrictions on residential activities and trips, because I appreciate this is the problem, right, for organisations like JLGB. I mean, organising that summer event, I think if my memory serves me right, the last time I was in the office, it was ahead of the event, and a huge amount of work. I know how much work goes into planning it. So it's hard for organisations. They want to plan in advance. They've got to plan in advance. But there's so much uncertainty at the moment. So let's keep everything crossed. But I will definitely take the question back and ask what the situation is and let the team know.
Thank you.
The next audience question is from Hannah Marcus from Liverpool.
Other guests that we have been privileged to interview on JLGB Virtual have talked about how grit, resilience, and determination are key to success. As a politician, you can't always win, and there can of course be setbacks and failures. What's been the hardest, most, or unexpected challenge you had to overcome in your life or career, and how did you learn and grow from it?
That's a really great question. I'm tempted to say Jeremy Corbyn, because that was not expected, and it certainly took a lot of grit and a lot of resilience to sort of come out the other side of that leadership. It was not, you know, it was not a happy period in my professional life, and you know, I kind of took my misery home as well, I think. Yeah, I think you know, one of the things I sort of reflect on, and it goes back to sort of some of the earlier questions about childhood, is, you know, life sometimes throws hurdles in your way. And, you know, when I think about my kind of childhood growing up and some of the challenges that I experienced because of, you know, the circumstances I was born into, you know, it made my journey to sort of where I am today harder. But I often make this comparison with Jacob Rees-Mogg. And not to be unkind to I don't know how many of you have seen Jacob Rees-Mogg on the TV, and you know, I mean this, you know, affectionately, having worked with him on the House of Commons Treasury Committee. He does look like someone who's kind of walked out of the 19th century and into Parliament, and he's got that kind of quite aristocratic kind of demeanour. I mean, you know, I would say this, but I think his politics are dreadful. But on a personal level, he's very charming, and actually, we worked together in a mutually respectful way on the Treasury Committee. But I remember when I first joined the House of Commons Treasury Committee, which is, you know, I joined not long after I was first elected. It's one of the more prestigious committees of the House of Commons. And Jacob was on there as well. And I would sit there and look across and think how remarkable it is that both of us are sat on this committee. Both of us have an equal weight, an equal voice, an equal vote, and our journeys here couldn't have been more different. And my sort of reflection is, you know, we've travelled the same distance and arrived at the same destination, but I've cleared hurdles in the way to get there, and I think that makes me the stronger athlete in a way. So I don't look back with sort of any sort of resentment or bitterness about the challenges that have been thrown in my way. I kind of think that, you know, I have learned in the process. Things haven't always gone smoothly, and one of the things about hurdles is sometimes you try and jump it and you end up falling flat on your face. And you know, that's been true in metaphorical hurdles. It's definitely true in practical hurdles. So I was useless at hurdles in school. And you pick yourself up, you dust yourself down, and you learn from it and you move on. And I think that's the way to kind of think about the challenges that life throws at you. And, you know, I'm glad actually that young people do talk more about their mental health and well-being. It's something we are getting better at as a society. And it's all right not to feel great all the time and to be able to share that. I also think it's important to, you know, cut yourself some slack and to, you know, to where things haven't gone well, just to remember that is life. Not everything goes well. Not everyone is perfect. No, in fact, no one is perfect. And so, you know, learn from those mistakes, learn from those challenges, and kind of look back with reflection on those challenges and try and draw some strength from what you learned in the process. That's my kind of strong advice.
So now for our final audience question Samuel Guillory, who is also from Ilford.
So, hello, hi, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you.
So on a lighter note, we've had some quite serious questions, but on a lighter note, after a long day of work, there could be some intense days, especially in the roles that you've had over the course of the last few years. How do you like to spend your downtime? Do you have any hobbies, and do you have any advice for switching off and calming down after having a tough day?
Yeah, I'm getting better at switching off. It's pretty difficult. I mean, I basically almost always have my phone with me, like a kind of surgical attachment, and that's a challenge in politics, where we live by WhatsApp culture, where there are loads of WhatsApp groups of MPs and they're always pinging with different things, and so you do have to try and switch off. Obviously, during lockdown, there really hasn't been much to do, so my switching off kind of activity is kind of binging box sets. So as I mentioned earlier, I've done all of Schitt's Creek. I watched The West Wing from start to finish again. I've done that a gazillion times. So I'm working my way through box sets, trying to get out and about and walk. Although, daylight hours make that a bit more challenging. So I'm glad of the lighter evenings. In normal times, let's think about something to look forward to. I do enjoy, seeing my friends and sort of going out socializing. So I'm very, very much looking forward to the pubs being open again. And, despite the dreadful politics of Wetherspoon's owner, I will be regularly found in the Fairlaw Poke on a Friday or Saturday night, and occasionally looking disapprovingly at KS sixth formers that I know certainly should not be in there, but somehow managed to get served, despite the strict licensing laws we have in this country. I really love going to the theatre. My partner is a much bigger fan of opera than I am. I do quite enjoy it. I like the spectacle of it and the music of it, but he's much more kind of into the actual opera. So we'll go to the Royal Opera House throughout the years from time to time as a sort of nice treat. I'm much more of a sort of, West End musicals sort of person. And yeah, other than that, just, sort of going out for dinner and that kind of thing. That's kind of my sort of classic sort of de-stressing sort of activities. I don't have any particular hobbies, to be honest. And, it's a bit hard in politics to sort of, dedicate yourself routinely to a particular activity, but I'm definitely a people person. I like spending time with people. I like spending time with friends. And I think that's why, for me, this last year has been a particular challenge, because I'm a naturally sociable person. And, I've done a few Zoom socials with friends, but it's just not the same, is it? Especially when you're on Zoom all day for work and, or study. The last thing you want to do at the end of the day is once again, kind of jump on Zoom. But I have to say, especially as this is the final question, this has not been one of those occasions where I've kind of thought, oh, another Zoom. It's been genuinely nice to sort of talk to you all and take your questions. And, I was talking to Abby a bit just before we started as well, sort of hear about your experiences of lockdown and, the sorts of things that, have been concerning you, your experiences of learning and socializing during the pandemic. As I said, I genuinely think people will look back on this period with, a stronger sense of sort of character and resilience that's been built over this time. There will be some inevitable war stories that come out of this as well. And I'm sure over time we'll all join in a bit of, sort of romanticizing what it was like to our sort of children and grandchildren. And this will be, the pandemic will be sort of, our generation's version of the war, although thankfully nowhere near as kind of disastrous as that was. But I think there is something about the kind of the shared national experience we've had. Of course, the painful and the difficult, and there's been far too much of that. And I think the experience I'll have taken from the pandemic that have been amongst the worst are, the Zoom funerals and, not being able to say goodbye to people we love in the way we normally would. I think it's been the hardest bit. But I think there's also been, you know, a bit of collective coming together, lots of acts of kindness and generosity and people looking out for each other, which gives me restores lots of faith in humanity and human nature. And also, you know, we're supporting our friends, supporting our family through this period as well. I think there will be, there'll be a lot to reflect on from this period in the future, but ultimately we'll have come through this together. And I think that is something for us to draw some strength and some, hopefully in time, you know, some joy from as well.
Thank you. And just a quick note, I've heard that you're quite a big fan of Star Trek and Star Wars.
This is true.
And just as a fun fact, that I was part of the interview for Brent Spiner, who you may know as Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation.
That's amazing. I'm a massive Star Trek fan. I have been since I was at secondary school, which I once made the mistake actually. I think it was the first ever non-uniform day we had in secondary school, and I wore my Star Trek Generations t-shirt, which marked me out and not in a positive way in my inner city boys school. I did not get a positive reception to my geeky Star Trek t-shirt, and at the time I was really self-conscious about it. So every subsequent school uniform day I wore whatever Arsenal shirt I had at the time. But you know what it's like when you're growing up and people pick on you for being different or singling things out, you know, in a way that can be, you know, people. I think actually sort of secondary school, one of the things that I think is bizarre actually is secondary school's a hard time for everyone growing up. You know, you're sort of learning a bit more about who you are. You know, you're changing as a person in all sorts of ways, and it's a shared experience that everyone's going through. But for some reason, people get to an age and a time in their lives where they decide that they're going to make everyone else's experience at that time in their life more miserable by picking on people or singling out things for being different. And actually, I think everyone would have had a better time as teenagers if they just supported each other a bit more and a bit kinder. But now having gone through that very self-conscious period and decided not to wear my Star Trek Generations t-shirt and not to read my Star Trek books in the classroom, or worse still, I had a copy of Tony Blair's speeches, New Labour, New Britain, My Vision of a Young Country. I once read that on the coach to and from games one Thursday afternoon, didn't make that mistake again. But now I'm sort of an adult and confident about who I am and comfortable in my own skin and don't really care what other people think in that respect. I'm very proud to be a geeky Trekkie, very proud to love Star Wars, and very proud to admire Tony Blair as well. So it doesn't get more sort of geeky than that.
Yeah, I consider myself like a sci-fi kind of like a sucker for it as well, like Star Wars, mainly Star Wars and Marvel, but Star Trek in there as well.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I mean, one of the things I'm missing about my sort of lockdown, I got into a lockdown routine where sort of, you know, at the end of every week I had Star Trek Discovery and The Mandalorian to look forward to, and they're sort of both released on the same day. And that's gone from my life at the moment. So I'm desperately waiting for some new series to come through. At the moment, and I'll be watching it once I've finished this evening, RuPaul's Drag Race UK on a Thursday, and the American version, which isn't so good, on a Saturday, is sort of my new go-to box sets. But other than that, I'm having to go through back catalogues of things like Star Trek: The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and that kind of stuff, because my usual lockdown telly is drying up.
Yeah.
Thank you. So now for the first of my final two questions that we always ask our guests, and I know that you have briefly mentioned this before. So these are unprecedented times, and the physical, mental health, economic and environmental impacts may affect us all for some time to come. But do you have hope for the future, and what positives may come out of this strange time that we all live in now?
Yeah, I'm naturally an optimist. I'm a glass half full sort of person. I'll be honest, my sort of faith in human nature, and you know, Martin Luther King famously said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice," and I love that. sense of hope and optimism, and almost a sense of inevitability that things naturally and necessarily get better. And my faith in that has been shaken in recent years. The election of Donald Trump and the sort of the growth of the far right in the United States, and actually on the European continent, where we're seeing fascists elected to power. There are loads of things about the world that have made me think. I grew up with Labour coming to power and real advances on things like LGBT rights, which directly affect me and I feel strongly about, and equalities more generally, and I've started to see that unraveling in recent years, and I thought actually progress is not inevitable and justice is not inevitable. You have to work for it and you have to fight for it. But I'm beginning to see the tide turning. The election of Joe Biden in the United States has given me an enormous sense of hope, and I really think that there's a responsibility on us in the aftermath of this pandemic to think about not how we build back, but how we build better, and how we make the future of our country and our world one that we can be proud to leave to future generations. And I think we've got some big challenges to do that. We've got to tackle the gross inequality we see in our country and others, where the gap between the richest and the poorest is widening. We've got to tackle the biggest challenge of our time in humanity, which is the risk of destructive and irreversible climate change. We've got to think about how we safeguard democracy in a world where tyranny is rearing its head too often, and think about how democracy can triumph. But I'm optimistic that all of those battles can be won. And I think that the pandemic has actually made people think about the things that they really value in life, their family, their friendships, their communities. And so I hope that we will come out of this with an optimistic sense of our future and a determination to build that future together. That's my great, great hope coming out of what has been a very challenging, difficult, and in some cases, very painful time for our country and our world.
Definitely. So finally, the big one. We always ask our guests to nominate and ask another national figure or celebrity to be a future guest on our programme and help entertain all the children and young people stuck at home. So if you've enjoyed tonight's experience, and we very much hope you have, is there anyone you might be able to ask to join us? Who would you like to nominate? Perhaps Sir Keir himself?
I will definitely go away and do that. I think Keir would really enjoy this, actually, and I think you'd enjoy talking to him. And the Mayor of London should come on as well, Sadiq Khan, who's also a pal of mine. So I'm going to make it my mission now to make sure that we get a very good, prominent Labour politician to come on, not some minor functionary like me. We'll get one of the big timers on to come and take your questions, because it's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed the questions, and I just sort of give a big shout out to the whole JLGB team, actually, because this really is a team effort. And what JLGB does with you and for you is genuinely impressive. And I as I said earlier, I really wish that I'd had something like this to be part of when I was your age. He says, sounding like an old git. I wish I had this when I was your age. Well, thank you. We've really enjoyed tonight's experience as well, and it sounds amazing if you could get us in touch with these people. So we cannot thank you enough for joining us this evening. Thank you for taking the time to answer all of our questions, especially during this challenging time. We've really enjoyed hearing about your amazing career so far, and are grateful for your inspiring and motivational words of wisdom. You really have been an outstanding ambassador for young people and our community for many years, and all of us here at JLGB are very grateful for your support. On behalf of all the children, young people and families watching, thank you once again. We wish you well and wish you every success. Please stay safe, take care, and we very much hope to see you again soon. Thanks, Abby, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And that's it, folks. Thank you for joining us for this episode of JLGB Virtual. Whether you've been watching live or catching up in your own time via JLGB HQ on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, or via our website at jlgb.org/virtual, please take a moment right now to like, subscribe, and share this episode on whatever platform you're on, so we can reach out and share some positivity with as many children, young people, and families as possible all over the world.
And if you're able to, why not consider making a donation at www.jlgb.org/donate. We'll be back next Thursday, the 11th of March, with another incredible guest on JLGB Virtual. You won't want to miss that. Until then, stay safe, be well, have a great week, and good night.